been about 100 boats in the bay.
I still remember I said, I can't keep this up anymore.
It was a pretty physical sort of a business.
1964, I reckon, I would have been at 5, they started getting the self-tipping gear and stuff.
Yeah, I developed the self-tipper when we were scalloping out off Bicheno.
And as he hit the brackish water, she started to go down.
The Dondra-Castro Channel south of Hobart was the first place in Australia to be fished commercially for scallops, beginning in the 1920s. For 40 years it was a cottage industry, the men doing the fishing, the women and children doing the splitting, or shucking. Scallop boats worked out of such little ports in the channel as Margate, Woodbridge, Gordon and Barnes Bay, but the principal port was always Kettering. The method was to drag an iron or steel scoop, known as a dredge, across the beds to scoop up the mollusks. It was originally done under sail, but when this footage was shot in 1938, small engines had been fitted to an odd assortment of boats. The dredge was hand-hauled after each tow, using coir rope made of coconut fibre.
The flannel coir stuff was about that round, and we were putting lip dredges, but it was terrible coil rope. If you got wet hands and handled the rope too much, the spikes would go in the joints of your fingers, and they were very sore. I reckon it had creosote or something in it, you know what I mean? Because it burnt, Gary.
A major innovation was the invention of the scallop winch.
My grandfather, on the Lewin, he had a scallop winch, and it never had a gearbox on it. There's a B section built down through the deck, a little box section he had there, and the B section went down and run off the front end of the main engine. And it was an old winch. He had 2 lignin Vitae blocks on them, one each side. And
no drum? No drum?
No, just these blocks about that round.
Several turns were taken around these round wooden blocks, normally known as a capstan or niggerhead. This was soon replaced by a drum and wire rope. Along with this came the gantry, which enabled the dredges, normally 2, to be winched up and swung on board. The contents were tipped out by hand. Heavy work, usually requiring 2 men.
We had two Sputniks, and I was tipping them by myself when they're full of scallops, not scallops or rubbish, or scallops too. But when you're young and fit, there was no trouble tipping them. But I was the gopher boy. So yeah.
You did the lot.
Yeah, picking them up there. He might come around the back of the wheelhouse now, go to pick up 1 or 2, but you had to keep on the drag anyway. You had to have somebody on the wheel all the time. Yeah, no pilots in them days. You were the pilot.
The scallops, Gary, weren't put in buckets then, or bins, they were put in not an ordinary banana box. It was put in a benzene box. Now, a benzene box was bigger. A benzene box, two boxes of Coles Bay scallops in a benzene box, and we used to put them in coffee bean bags. You get them from Cadbury's, the bigger bags, you see. And we used to put two benzene boxes in there, split 28 pound, about 28 pound of scallops. They were good big scallops, you know. Yeah, so and down here, there were smaller scallops down here. Some patches were better, right down Taylor's Bay was good. Harry and my brother, older brother, and Dad got a little patch there, and Jimmy Archer.
A good day was 20 bags. That was a good day.
Oh, anywhere from 10 to 40 bags. All depends where you worked and what sort of scallops you worked on.
Dennis mentioned 2 Sputnik dredges. These were a redesign of the earlier lip dredge, as seen being used in this 1938 film. The Sputnik dredge was introduced in 1958. With its pressure plate and toothed bar, it was considered 50% more effective than the lip dredge. The pressure plate on top pushed the dredge firmly onto the seabed, while the teeth scooped up the scallops. The Sputnik dredge was developed by the Fisheries Research Station at Conway in Wales It was originally known as a pressure dredge due to its main feature, the top pressure plate. However, it gained a new name in Tasmania.
Yeah, but this dredge, Gary, how it got its name, Sputnik, is because remember the Russian Sputnik? They were the first ones to put a satellite in space, a Sputnik. Now, there was, Jimmy Archer told me this. Jimmy Archer was a cousin. He had the fishing boat called the Beryl. And they brought it down. They rang one of the boys up and said they got to bring it down. So Jimmy rang these other fellas, and there was about half a dozen on the Gordon jetty. And this thing rolled up, and they got it off the trailer, and I think they was going to tow it with the Fiona, if I remember. And anyway, Das Whitten walked out the wharf, and he used to smoke Champion Ruby tobacco. I think it was. Anyway, Jimmy said he walked out there, and he pulled his tobacco out of his back pocket, and he put his foot up on it like that, and he said, well, it looks like the bloody Sputnik's landed. It was something they'd never saw before, yeah, and this Sputnik in the sky was the latest fucking invention. Old ass reckoned it was a flaming Sputnik that landed, so that's how he got his name, the Sputnik dredge.
At time of the Lee runner was using as the what I call them pressure dredge, Sputnik dredges, that was a nickname, had a pressure plate on them. And there was two of them, and they were 2 4-footers. And we used to work at a Ketron, and that's where we had our splitting shed. And now that was a family affair, really. Like I asked my sister the other day about, I said, do you remember? And she said, Dennis, I was only 12, and Mum was there, and all the family were there. And it was, at that time, it was like a family affair, all the swords, and it was all family.
This here is one of the two of the old scallop sheds, and there was a row of sheds and jetties further down the bay, and all the swords had their own jetties and sheds, and their own splitters, of course. I used to split scallops before I went to school, and after school, and after tea of a night. There was my brother, myself, and 3 sisters. When I took over the shed when I was 15-year-old, when I left school, my brother went on the boat, and I used to work 1 day a week on the boat while my father had a day off, and then I'd go back in the shed. I tipped the bags and the boxes of shells, empty shells for the sisters, and I didn't get any more money for it. It was pretty hard. I worked one season for a push bike. And one other year when I was going to school, sometimes I'd miss school over it though, I split 2.5 tonne of scallops. Oh, I could split over £200 a day.
The scalloping in the channel was good. There was a lot of scallops here. I mean, Dad was working on the boats when he was a boy.
Splitting season come, like we'd all get in together and everybody, nearly all the women go splitting. Grace Southern, she was one of the best splitters we had in our shed. She was good. But all the boats would come down there, they'd all anchor out of Gordon. Some are like down near the jetty, others up near the sheds. There were seven sheds along that beach, and everyone had done their own scallops.
This is where the scallop splitting sheds were here, Gary. There were scallop splitting sheds behind us here. I think it was around about 14 sheds or more here along here, and a different. Les Whitten had a shed, Das Whitten had a shed. His father, because that Sally had, and the Ralph's Bay.
Unlike Kettering, the boats at Gordon lay off on moorings.
Well, they used to come in every night. They'd come in. They'd have their trucks there waiting for them, and they'd load them off the boats and take them to the shed. Then they'd take the empty shells back to the boats, and they'd take them out and tip them out back in the water. They used to go below the jetty and just empty them as they went. The ladies, mainly ladies, split through the day, so that they could have fresh scallops every day. As soon as you finished splitting, we'd wash them.
They had proper washers to wash them in. They stood on 4 legs, and they were built with one end was a funnel, and they put the tin under the funnel when they were worked and scoop them into the tins. They had 40-pound tins and 25-pound tins.
Like cover them over till the truck come, and then the truck could come take them into Hobart. If anybody wanted to buy any, they'd just come to the shed door and knock. Can we buy a bucket of scallops or billy of scallops? And billy of scallops are usually around about $1 or something like that. Wasn't very dear. When we first started splitting, we always used to sit down. Then somebody decided that there was going to be all the bench we were going to stand up. Well, from then on, we never ever sat down again. We always stood up. It was a lot easier. A lot easier to tip the shells and all that. It was a really good way of life, I thought. I used to enjoy it. I used to love splitting. I still do. I would go back tomorrow if I could. Everybody swapped recipes with everybody else, and the ones that had little kids usually had a cot in the shed that the little kids would stay in the cot. Usually, we used to work from daylight till dark.
You started in the frost and you worked in the frost at night. After tea you'd go back to work again.
The increased efficiency of the Sputnik dredge led to greater profits, which brought more boats into the fishery with predictable results: overfishing. A fishery which had lasted for decades using the old lip dredge was ruined in 2 or 3 years using the new Sputnik dredge. By 1960 it was just about all over. The fleet was forced to find scallop beds elsewhere, which they did with some success. One man, Bill Donaldson, in a boat named the Coldstream, headed for Port Phillip Bay, but more of that later. The rest turned their attention to the east coast.
We all pitch in during the short scallop season, and with the addition of a platform on the stern of any fishing boat, we can dredge for these tasty shellfish. There are about 50 boats working the beds just off Maria Island. They work back and forth 12 hours a day across this rich half-mile.
Everybody used to go around dragging all over the place, just looking for scallops. Anyway, we got them there one time, and I tell everybody that's the only time I've ever used a shovel to shovel scallops in. They were bean bags, not spud bags. They were bean bags.
Which are bigger?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the bean bag. Yeah, and they were just pure white scallops, all up the size, oversized, and. So we got stuck in there. I think maybe we started at in the afternoon or something, and they got better and better. And then I had to keep up, so I got the shovel out, and we had 70 bags by 1 o'clock in the morning. And the little Lee runner, she was nearly down to the deck. They weren't spud. They were heavy bean bags, the big bean bags from the factory, the Cadbury's. And and I said to Dad, I still remember, I said, I can't keep this up anymore, because I was tipping 2 4-foot dredges by myself.
I worked on the tray on my own with 4-foot Sputnik dredges. And some nights we worked to 11 o'clock or later, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, and we'd unload the following morning about 7 o'clock and start again. When I was on my own on the tray, I lost a stone weight in 10 days. But there were days and nights.
When I first went up the East Coast, went up to Davana with Dad, and we fished Tribana, and right where the wood chip mill is there, Tribana off the mouth of Spring Bay on the north side there, right where the piles are driven in the shallow there, we worked that for flaming weeks in there. They were real good. We'd just go along steady and never knock it around. And there were a few boats that went round the quarter from there. Albert Reardon then went over to Maria, what is it called? Just off the wharf at Maria, because there was a patch over there.
And they were pretty good up there. But the big patch we found was in between Maria and Tribana, out on a sort of a flat paddo out there.
And then we went to Coles Bay, and we had moorings up in Coles Bay, and we used to sell fish to Albert Thompson to Tribana. And they were good scallops. Coles Bay scallops were very good scallops. Right up in Coles Bay itself, up under the chalet and that there. They were good scallops, but there was just so much grit. This grit, and the big wild oyster shells were that big round, you know, but this flaming grit, and my word, those dredges were heavy.
They were really good round Coles Bay way, and then we went over to what they call the western shore, the western side of Coles Bay, and that's where we dredged just chock-a-block full of just undersized scallops. And we said, we'll come back here next year, and we did, full of starfish. The starfish come in, see? That was amazing. We just thought, we'll have them made here next year. Dreamers.
We sold to Nevada, and I worked with Les, and we went scalloping up off Beecham and places like that, you know, just north of the Governor's Rock and straight up across there towards Long Point. It was good up in there. Good scallop, not too far away. I used to see the lights of Beecham just from here to Bruny way or less, you know. Yeah, so, and I was getting £1 a bag there. We were getting 30 or 40 bags a day. I was one of the richest deckhands on the coast. Yeah, and I spent it up there too. I put a lot of money in real estate, Gary. Every flapping pub in Tasmania, just about.
While the more efficient Sputnik dredge caused the demise of the D'Entrecasteaux Channel fishery, the development of the more extensive East Coast fishery would not have been possible without it. This was due to fishing deeper water and the ability of the pressure plate on the Sputnik to hold the dredge on the seabed where the old lip dredge tended to lift off the bottom. With new beds being found, there was a rapid build-up in the fleet.
A couple of years scalloping with Gordon Doyle on the Burngana, and he came and saw me one day to see if I'd go with him, so I said yes, and he said, I'm putting the gear on tomorrow if you'd come down and give me a hand. So I went down and to Deepwater Jetty, and he came down with a tractor, a couple of planks, and he drove the tractor onto the Burngana, put it in place where he wanted it, and put a couple of chains on it, tied it down. Next thing, he took the wheels off and put the wire drums on it, and that's how she was set up. And the wire went through the wheelhouse at just about the middle of your shins, and if you got, you tripped over it, and that's how we worked it. But she was a good old scallop boat, for sure.
With the new mobility of the fleet, the cottage industry as enjoyed in the Channel, of families splitting scallops while the men fished, disappeared virtually overnight, their place taken by processing factories, again employing mainly women.
When we worked Coles Bay and that, and then we went to Beecham, Cape Lodi and that, just the south side. And then we ended up at St Helens. This is in 63 now I'm talking about. We went to St Helens. There was a fair few boats at St Helens. And we got down off Falmouth and that, there were scallops there. And the Cape Lodi ones, you never measure them. They was good scallops, you shovel them straight to bag. Just shovel them in with a shovel, you know. And off Falmouth too was the same. And these were only little dredges here. I think about 4 or 5 foot was the biggest dredges, you know. But 4 footers and that, because you had to tip them by hand still. And the deckhands would get one either side and lift it. 1964, I reckon, it would have been 5, they started getting the self-tipping gear and stuff.
Again, necessity being the mother of invention, the self-tipping dredge was developed, which was another quantum leap forward in the industry.
Yeah, I developed the self-tipper when we were scalloping out off Bicheno, and get a bit of a northeaster in there at times, and it was quite rough at times. That didn't worry the scallops. It meant that it was quite dangerous climbing up on the tray to tip the dredges, etc., and get them back in the water. We're looking for a system that was safer. I was always been a model builder, and it was convenient for me I had some material around to build a small model out of balsa wood of a tray, and worked the angles out to make a self-tipper work. And so the first self-tipper was made of balsa wood.
In miniature.
in miniature, made a balsa wood in miniature, and then I put it on my father's boat and the Gazelle. So I don't remember which was first, but the two boats had the self-tippers, and we played around with it for a little while to get the angles right. And I do remember off the east coast of Tassie, off Bicheno, we had the self-tipper on board, and everyone was amazed that, you know, of this invention, and it wasn't long at all before others started to copy it.
The self-tipper had the added advantage that crew could stand on deck to sort scallops rather than bending over up on the tray. As the boats worked further north, new scallop beds were being found all the time, and new operators entering the fishery. The 1960s were a period of great optimism. All fisheries were booming and boat builders were kept busy. Apart from size limits, there were no restrictions in the scallop fishery. There were only 3 ports on the east coast of Tasmania where catches could be unloaded: Triabuna, Bicheno, with only 1 unloading berth, and St Helens, which had a shallow entrance. This limited deep-drafted boats. Even with its shortcomings, St Helens was a major unloading port over a long period, even when the action moved up into eastern Bass Strait.
We caught fish at St Helens everywhere. There were so many scallops. There were just so many scallops. There were semi-trailers loaded. More, but semi-trailer loads a day going out of St Helens. I can still see Greg Rainbird and Chubby Longy and one of the Lucas boys sitting on top of the big semi-trailer load of scallops. You know, it was in the Weekly Times and that. However,
alternative ports for boats working eastern Bass Strait were Bridport or Beauty Point. The passage from Flinders Island to either port could be problematic in winter, when northwest gales could be frequent and violent.
Early days, we'd head straight to Beauty Point. 14, 15 hours steam across Bass Strait in the middle of winter, in gales of wind and stuff. That was good fun. We did have one situation where we had 180 bags, freezer full and 180 bags on deck. And it was a bit heavy weather, and she shot all the bags of fish over on one side, so we had about a 30, 40 degree list on her. There for a while. So we very gently turned around and went down with the weather for a minute and put them back where they're supposed to be and tied them down. But she's a bloody good boat. Weather didn't worry her too much, and we were young and 10 foot high and bulletproof. It didn't matter what the weather does, we just punched our way through it.
Bridport, like St Helens, has a shallow bar which has to be negotiated at high tide or suffer the consequences.
I know Johnny Clinton tipped 100 bags over the side on the bar way at Bridport. Nearly rolled the boat over with it, but a whole lot fell over the side. Stacked up 10 foot high, of course, and St Helens, there was a few went over the side of St Helens Bar way too.
While this scallop boom was taking place on the east coast of Tasmania, a simultaneous boom was happening in Port Phillip Bay. It had long been known that scallops existed in the bay, and small quantities had been caught by Brian Francis in the Francis Drava in 1960. The resource was proven in September 1963 by Bill Donaldson in the Coldstream, as alluded to earlier. Several Tasmanians followed Bill up into the bay. Not surprisingly, Victorian fishermen also joined the fray.
And I was one of them. I had a little 28-footer that I took down to Melbourne scalloping in May 1964. And the fishery had only been going a few months at that time. There were boats everywhere, a lot of them ex-Tasmanian. Used to live aboard. Living aboard a 28-footer is pretty basic, I can tell you. There wasn't much cooking done. We used to split a few scallops coming in from the drag, and I had a little set of scales and a few plastic bags, and you could bet there'd be a gang of wharfies at South Wharf coming along there loading a ship. You'd pull into the wharf there and the wharfies would come along. You'd sell them a pound of scallops in a plastic bag for 2 and 6, 25 cents. Then we'd have some money to go up to Flinders Street, to a little old cafe there near Spencer Street, and have a good old feed. And lots of Tassie boats there. I can remember Claudia Hargraves in the Liaweenie and Bill Donaldson in the Coldstream. Lloyd Fenner was there in the Punarella, the Wayfarer, and Jim Shea was there in the Flying Cloud. I can't think of all the names now. There's a pretty rough corner of the town. North Wharf, a few working girls and beachcombers and hangers-on and con men. Bit of an eye-opener for a little old kid from Portland, I can tell you.
I went down to Mornington because there's about 15 boats down there, mainly ex-Tasmanian cray boats. There was around about 100 boats in the bay. Quite a few were worked out of Port Arlington. At Port Arlington, they would have had a fleet of about 10 or 12 boats. Queenscliff, much similar. And the Yarra River, or Maribyrnong River, there might have been another 15 to 20 boats come out of there each day. And they fish all over the bay. Not everybody had their own sort of areas they worked.
Although Port Phillip Bay is landlocked, anyone expecting smooth waters would be in for a surprise.
There's a drag off Williamstown, and you go around the corner and you go up towards Werribee and Laverton. We used to try, Gary, but it was you couldn't go up into it because you were dragging, flopping your dredge around, so we'd go up and come down, and the wind would nearly blow you down. But it wasn't far, but the waves were broken over the bloody tray and washing your fish off and washing around. You wouldn't think in that short fetch you'd had that the waves would get so high, would you? But they were hard bruises.
The bay can get quite fresh. It can be, it's not the open ocean, but for a little place it gets pretty nasty for sure, especially down in the corner down near Drummond or down near Mornington. If you get fresh northwest and it rips all the way across the bay, it gets pretty average down in there by the time it gets to you. Yeah.
Dad's first boat, it was a wet boat. It was the Careen. Every day I came home with wet gumboots, and but she was a yacht design, so deep draft. She drew about 8'4", and Dad loved it, but roll. And he decided one day he was going to plug. It was a cray boat from Tassie, one of the early ones that came out in '63, and he decided he was going to plug up the well. It was the worst thing he could have done. She rolled more, and but everything was damp on the boat. 2-burner stove, the typical Tassie cray boat at the day, and the bunks are always wet. And we were more or less, when I started, we were a cut lunch job anyway. We'd leave in early hours of the morning and home late at night. But his biggest load of scallops was 163 bags, and he was heading up the Yarra to unload at North Wharf, and as he hit the brackish water, she started to go down. She was already decks awash, but it was he hit that brackish water. She lost more buoyancy, and he had to turn around, and he went back to Williamstown Gem Pier and unloaded about 50 or 60 bags there, and then went up and unloaded the rest up at North Wharf.
63, something like that, when the boats first came to Port Phillip Bay. And I joined him on the boat, and it was the old days in the Sputnik dredges, and that was a different experience. 2 dredges were lifted up on a gantry, and 2 guys got up on the tray, one each side, pulled the Sputnik dredge in, and the winch operator dropped it down. Then you knocked it over, pushed it over onto a 4x4 or 6x6, and then got behind it and tipped it up and shook all the stuff out of it, and then threw it back over the side. It was a pretty physical sort of a business. And
then Dad experimented with a trapdoor, and I think there was a few involved in that, but the trapdoor one came up on an A-frame, and it came straight up, and they opened up a trapdoor and they all fell out the bottom, and they had little manholes that they'd stand in, the crew. And that was an innovation because they'd be working at waist height, and that worked quite successfully. And then the self-tipper came in. There is a bit of a debate about who invented the self-tipper, but Dad believes it was invented by David Cantlay, and I think he was skippering Dad's boat at the time, and that was the connection there.
I do remember my last trip up the East Coast, some of the fishermen were in St Helens at one stage, and I decided not to go with them, but they all went off to Melbourne to find the scallops in Melbourne. And the following year I went to Melbourne, and that's when I would have introduced the self-tipper to Melbourne at that stage.
It was the winter of 1964 that Robert went to Melbourne in the Gazelle with his 2 4-foot self-tipping Sputnik dredges. This almost certainly predates David Cantlay's work. It would seem that Cantlay, working the Corinne in Port Phillip Bay for Bill Cull Sr., saw the potential of the self-tipper and developed it further by replacing the 2 4-foot dredges with 1 8-foot dredge. This drawing is out of the Australian Fisheries newsletter, September 1967. Over time, wider dredges were used on larger vessels. However, Clifford continued to prefer the 2 4-foot dredges.
Yeah, I didn't go to 8-foot wide dredges because I always preferred to have 2 dredges. You'd always be playing with the length of the teeth on the bar, etc. And always one dredge would catch a little bit more than the other. And it always made it possible to compare a good dredge with a bad dredge. And so consequently you could get your catch rate up by just playing with one, making it better, then making the other one a little bit better, etc.
George Johnson, then of Mornington, is also mentioned in the development of the self-tipper, but at this stage it is uncertain as to how. There was estimated to have been 100 boats working in the bay in the mid-60s. No restrictions existed. Boats could operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if they wished. Scallop beds were dispersed around the bay, and boats worked out of 5 main ports. In the late 1960s, boats began berth at Footscray, near Tom Kivelos Scallop Splitting Factory. They were a colourful sight as seen from Shepherd's Bridge for the next 30 years, especially on St Nicholas Day.
So incredible amount of boats, and of all sizes, and anywhere from little 32-footers all the way through to the bigger ones, like the 80-footers. So, but yeah, it was the wild days, and he moved to Port Ellington. He moved the whole family to Port Ellington when I was about 7 or 8. So, and that's where we settled, and that's where we are now.
The word sustainability appears to have been unknown to the fisheries managers of the 1960s. After just 4 years without restrictions, the pressure soon took its toll on scallop stocks, a scenario which had been predicted by fisheries scientists back in 1965.
Anyway, we got to the situation in the bay that I think I worked 10 hours for 1 bag of scallops.
It had been depleted. There wasn't that many boats working there, and most of the skippers or most of the owners were working on their own, so they'd go to sea and they couldn't afford to put a crew on. And I can remember Dad going out there, and I'd work with him on the weekend, and every day I possibly could get off school and give him a hand. And the difference between having 1 crew on and just working on your own was about a bag a day. So I made up. So we went from 3 bags to 4 bags when I went out, and of course it was great pocket money back then. And I was often heard Dad say, yeah, 1 for me, 1 for Mum, and 1 for the boat. And that's the way he worked it out during the day. And if he had on his own, if he had a good day and he'd come in with 5, you'd think that was just heaven. That was a great day's work. But they were really scratchy, and there was quite a lot of people had second jobs, so they would certainly on the weekends they were working, trying to keep things going, and their partners or their wives at home there, they had second jobs, which is what Mum had too. Mum went back into hairdressing when things started getting tight.
A couple of adventurous fellas, Lloyd Fenner and Ian Lew. They got the message that the trawlers at Lakes Entrance were picking up a few scallops in their nets. So they decided to go down to Lakes Entrance and have a go. So Ian and Lloyd came down to Lakes Entrance, and they were having a look around there, and they discovered that quite a lot of scallops, and they were coming in with pretty good hauls.